Okay, so let's talk about stress. So we are going to talk about stress before we get to trauma, because trauma is on the far end of the stress spectrum. Okay, so we are first going to talk about what stress is and how we experience stress. Okay, so what the experience of stress is, it is something that a person individually assesses as personally threatening to them in some way, whether that's physically, emotionally. That can even just be their own peace or their own like sense of balance or homeostasis. Okay, so you have something that a person assesses as potentially threatening to themselves, and they do not have the necessary resources to cope with that threat. Those resources can be don't have enough time, don't have the social support, I don't have the ability or the knowledge to actually deal with this issue, whatever it is, okay? This whole idea is called the cognitive appraisal of stress theory. Cognitive meaning thinking, appraisal meaning we are making an evaluation. Lazarus and Folkman are the two main theorists of this idea. This was one of the foundational theories that I used in my doctoral research as well. Okay, so this cognitive appraisal of stress, this all happens unconsciously and in an instant. Very few of us are faced with something and we can sit back and be like, is this personally threatening to me? Do I have the resources to cope with it? No, happens super fast. So how does it work? There's a series of questions that we just kind of entertain when we're faced with a situation. The very first is, does this pertain to me? If it doesn't, whatevs, you move along. If it does pertain to you, you kind of move on to the second question, which is this threatening to me in some way? Once again, if no, whatevs, you move on. If it is, you have just had your primary stress appraisal. Okay. If this happens, you then move into a secondary appraisal, which is, do I have the resources to cope with it? So let's talk about what that could actually look like. Loss of a job is considered an incredibly stressful experience. Okay. Let's break that down through this cognitive appraisal of stress idea. It's not just any job loss. If you come home one day and your neighbor tells you that they just lost their job, oh, that's rough. You can have empathy, you can have sympathy, you can even be like, glad it's not me kind of thing, right? But if that loss of a job does not pertain to you, whatever, you're moving away. You're not going to have stress over that. Now, let's say you experience the loss of a job, okay? That pertains to you. Is it threatening to you? And do you have the resources to cope with it? Okay. If you I don't know, if you are independently wealthy and you just had the job for fun, then maybe that's not very threatening to you. So you're like, okay, I'm fine. Maybe you are, you have plenty of money in your savings. So you have the resources to cope with it. You are going to have a different experience of the loss of a job as opposed to an individual whose identity is wrapped up in their career, in someone who is living paycheck to paycheck. The loss of a job means the inability to afford your life, your rent, your food, stuff with kids, things like that. Okay. So you can kind of see how this cognitive appraisal of stress, it matters. Let's also think about public speaking or bungee jumping or anything that can provoke any sort of stressful experience. Public speaking is incredibly stressful for some people. For other people, absolutely not at all. It is completely fine. Okay. So that's why you can't say any one single thing is stressful. It has to be an individual assessment. So this means that the way we interpret a situation directly impacts the way we experience it. Okay. Now, on a little side note, learning to reframe certain things like public speaking can actually lessen or even eliminate the experience of stress. This one study, this experimental design has been replicated many times in many different contexts. But the main part is there are two groups. You have an experimental group who is given information about how stress can actually be very beneficial. It can be helpful to performance, which is true, and how physiological arousal with the heart beating and the respiratory and even the sweating, the flush, all of that can actually be a really, really good thing. So that's the experimental group. They got all this information about that. The control group, they got nothing. And then all the participants in both groups are given a potentially stressful task to do: public speaking, being scrutinized by judges, doing like these weird math problems, like counting backwards by sevens or something. And then everyone is measured on both their physiological responses, their heart rate, their respiratory rate, all of that, as well as being asked what they're objectively experiencing in terms of emotion. Are you feeling anxiety? Are you feeling stress? All this different stuff. And the groups who are given information about the positive responses of stress, or learn to reframe what's happening in their bodies and their physiological sense as well as their emotions, learning to reframe those as excitement or anticipation instead of nervousness or fear or stress, they fare way better. Okay, this is even true for people who suffer from social anxiety, which I find fascinating. No increase in stressful or anxious feelings. So again, how we appraise a situation means we will experience that situation in that way. That's a little bit about what stress is and how we experience it. And next time I'll talk a little bit about the stress and trauma, how they kind of fit together and where that spectrum is. I will link references as well. If you have any questions, please let me know. I will answer them. And if I don't know the answer, I will tell you and I will go and look it up and do my best to answer. So, thanks.